And thank you for joining us for this joint National Consortium for Societal Resilience and Resilience Beyond Observed Capabilities Network Plus webinar on how to address flood risk. So just a reminder to everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch back later. So my name is Andrew McClelland and I'm a research fellow at the University of Manchester. So as well as welcoming you to this webinar, I'll also be moderating the question and answer session later on. You will have noticed that your mics and your cameras are currently switched off, but you can contribute questions and comments via the chat function. Later during the question and answer session, I will ask questioners to raise their hands and we can then individually enable people's mics and cameras. So our agenda for this webinar is straightforward, and we're delighted to have two excellent speakers joining us, with Carol Raeburn, who's Director of the Scottish Flood Forum, and we have Emma Thomson, who's National Community Flood Resilience Advisor for the Environment Agency. So our recent engagement with local community resilience groups indicated a number of the top issues on which they would like to learn more about, and hence why we have created this How to Communities webinar series, very much grounded in the feedback that we receive from local community resilience group. Top among those issues was flood prevention, response, and how local communities can self-help to address flood risk. And therefore, obviously, we are delighted to bring together a couple of speakers today to focus on this particular issue. So a really great welcome to all of you who are perhaps joining us for the first time, and a warm welcome back to those of you who have attended previous webinars. So through this webinar, we really hope to spotlight examples of how flood risk is being addressed and provide a supportive space for sharing experiences and transferable lessons. Before handing you over to Carol and Emma, however, I just want to make a couple of housekeeping announcements around the dates of future webinars within the series, but also then some reminders as to where you can find the details of not only this webinar when the recording is available, but also of all of the previous webinars that we have been involved with. So upcoming webinars, we have a webinar being addressed by a number of our colleagues from New Zealand, which is happening on the 25th of June at 7:30 p.m. UK time. So we have a couple of speakers set up who work in the Wellington region, who will focus on the two topics of respecting animals, but also then respecting cultures during times of disruption. Then on the 1st of July, we have another webinar within this series, which will focus on how to support the well-being of volunteers. The registration links for these webinars are already available, and we're delighted that several hundred people have already registered for them. And you can find further details, not only of previous webinars, but then the registration links to those too. So you can find that via the webpage at the top of this slide. You can also then find details of the future webinars, but also past events and other publications via our LinkedIn page. So if you're not already connected with us, please do so. And then I would also encourage you to check out the webpage of our partner within this series, the Resilience Beyond Observed Capabilities Network Plus project, which again you can see on the screen. So as I said, the recording from today's webinar should be available via the web page at the top of this slide towards the end of the week. And you can also find the recordings of the several dozen webinars that we have held previously. So that's all from me for the moment. I will obviously be with you again after we've heard from both our speakers to help in the moderation of the Q&A session. But if I can ask Carol, if you can please share your slides, and then we'll obviously get going. So thank you, Carol.
So if either Andrew or Emma can just advise whether they can see anything, because I'm struggling at the moment to...
Nothing yet, Carol.
Okay. Just bear with, folks. Let's try this again. Go. Right.
So
has it come
nothing
through?
yet. Are you able to see the
I can see the right. Have you got it now, folks?
not yet, Carol. I will just see if I
to...
can share for you. I will
Yes.
I will just find the slides and then I can begin to share. So
Can
Carol, if you maybe
if you wish.
Well, if Carol would maybe like to start the presentation, then I will find the slides and I can share. But Carol, if you'd maybe like to go ahead,
Yes,
then I will find this in the background.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to present to you all. My presentation is entitled Every Time It Rains, and I'm looking at the impact of flooding on communities. My name's Carol Raeburn. I'm director of the Scottish Flood Forum. So despite the fact I'm representing Scotland, some of the points I hope to discuss with you this afternoon are quite universal in terms of flooding. So the Scottish Flood Forum has been in existence for about 13 years now. Our remit is to cover the whole of Scotland and the islands. We are a relatively small team of 4 full-time and 2 part-time staff, and we get involved in a variety of different aspects of flooding. We have 3 channels, which are the recovery piece, the resilience piece, and almost as a third side, it is looking at the issues around and property flood resilience measures, for example, what's happening in the industry. And we are funded by the Scottish Government, and we also provide a secretariat function to an organisation called the Property Flood Resilience Delivery Group, which is pretty similar to the PFR Roundtable, which there is in existence on the other side of the border. Andrew, if you could bring me up the next slide, please.
Go ahead, Carol.
Okay, so there may be people in this audience who have personal experience of flooding. And if you have, could you pop a few words in the chat just to let us know where you've experienced flooding, when and how long you were out of your home for. Every time there's a weather warning, you may be unable to sleep. You may be glued to your phone more so than usual, charting the levels of rainfall in your area, checking the information on flood gauges and community alerting systems, making sure your flood barrier is ready just in case. The picture you see before you is Lorraine's home in Glasgow. I use the word home rather than house deliberately. A home is not just bricks and mortar. It is your safe place, the place of memories, your first foot on the property ladder, the place where you and your child takes its first steps, and so much more. Lorraine's home has been flooded 8 times in 15 years. When the rains came again, over a metre of water entered her home. Houses in the same street, which had never been flooded before, were flooded for the first time. It is also the first time that she experienced flooding as a mum. Her 5-year-old daughter is having nightmares. Lorraine cries when she still tells you this. I think it's important for us all to realise that in terms of communities, we have to start developing a place of understanding of what flooding means to the people that we may be interacting with, whether we're an insurance provider, we're a local authority, member of a flood team, a resilience worker, community development officer, or just a member of the public who maybe hasn't experienced flooding before. And sometimes those areas are in conflict with each other because of that lack of understanding. It's all very well to say you will bounce back, but that's maybe not always the case. Can I have the next slide, please, Andrew? So this screenshot here is of 5 areas of Scotland that we have worked in across Scotland. Flooding is occurring more frequently. You will know that perhaps from your own experiences. In the pictures here, we have the floods in Ailith. So that's the top left-hand scene that you can see there. Flooded in 2015, in 2020, and the burn overtopped in 2021. The bottom right-hand corner is Balnatter up in Aberdeenshire, flooded in 2015 to a very large extent, with even local landmarks getting perilously close to falling in the water, and again in 2023. The bottom right-hand corner is Perth City, flooded in 1992, 2010, 2020, 2023, and so it goes. Stonehaven, which is the top right picture that you see there, was flooded in 2009, again in 2020, and there is or was a flood scheme under construction but wasn't finished at the time of the 2020 floods. The impact of the severe weather at the time caused a landslip in the area, which was blamed for the Aberdeenshire train crash, which resulted in fatalities. And the one in the centre of the screen is Newcastleton, again in 2020. We are witnessing multiple flood events occurring simultaneously across quite a wide geographical spread, and that's no different for us in Scotland to what the position is in England as well. So we have been involved in supporting these communities to get back on their feet. And just as some householders were recovering and starting to actually go back into their homes, they were hit again. Next slide, please, Andrew. So after the floodwaters recede, the cleanup starts, and these pictures are fairly typical of what householders are encountering. So how do you recover from an event like this? And actually, there's that old chestnut of a question. What do we actually mean by recovery? Like resilience, it can be an overused word. Yes, furniture can be replaced, but memories can't. Your child's first drawing in that box of keepsakes, which was not out of reach of the floodwater, can't. And every time it rains, that fear balls in the bottom of your stomach once again. Storms or severe weather events don't take any prisoners. They don't stop or avoid those people who are facing life challenges. And that's something that we as practitioners have to factor into every conversation and every interaction. They get double trouble when the resistance, or that word, yes again, is the overused resilience, is at the lowest. For example, during the pandemic, flooding did not stop for frontline healthcare professionals. Temporary accommodation and bed and breakfasts and hotels was no longer available as these premises shut their doors. For some, there was no option but to stay in their properties and live with the situation as best they could. When toilet rolls were disappearing off their shelves and there was panic buying to fill freezers, there were families who were living on microwave meals because it was the only cooking appliance that they had. Replacement white goods were in short supply, but so were other essential repair items such as plasterboard. Insurance claims were taking longer to process because loss adjusters were working remotely and could not carry out visual inspections in person. The pandemic has also had an impact on family finances. Sometimes the insurance premiums are too much, and householders are having to make choices about the levels of cover they can afford, or indeed whether they can afford to insure their homes at all. If you have a choice between insurance cover for an event that may not happen, or putting food on the table or fuel in the car to get to work, there are some very difficult choices there. And again, we need to be aware of these choices. So, how can individuals and communities take back some of the control over their lives and be prepared for the next time? Next slide, please, Andrew. Be prepared. Think about your own safety and that of your loved ones. Flooding is dangerous, and there have been fatalities UK-wide. During Storm Babette in October 2023, Angus, which was badly impacted by the floodwaters, suffered 5 fatalities during that time. There's well-documented reports on the news, and the Water Accident Incident Database is now advancing the detail in that database in terms of the recording of fatalities and death by drowning in flood water. We need to think about flooding in quite a different way, particularly in terms of safety messaging. We treat flooding differently to fire, for example. We've all seen scenes of cars being washed away, all too familiar in news reports. But the power and speed of flood water needs to be acknowledged. In Scotland, the Scottish Flood Forum is working with Water Safety Scotland, which is trying to reduce those number of fatalities by looking at safety messages. In a previous life, I worked with the RNLI, a well-known life-saving charity. And again, I know that many of local fire crews are volunteers who are actually being called out in times of danger. As part of an interview for BBC Scotland during Storm Babette, I was taken to task by a reporter who said, "But you're advocating that people leave their homes." Yes, that's a choice. But equally, we've also got to educate and raise awareness of the dangers of flood water, because of the fact that it's not just those individuals who don't evacuate timeously that are in danger. It's also our volunteer and rescue services as well. Another key piece of preparation is the packing of a grab bag, which has essentials such as medication, a copy of your insurance documents if you have them, nappies for the baby, bottled water, and a phone charger. As part of our suite of resources, which is available to householders and to local authorities as well, we have developed a suite of information booklets which can help households to do this. If you're representing a local authority and are on this meeting this evening, what I would suggest to you is something called the easy read format, because we have to bear in mind that English is not everyone's first language, and the reading age across the UK at the moment is not so great. So we have to make the information that we're trying to convey in a simple and easily accessible format. But involve the whole family. I think it was the University of Leicester did some research a number of years ago about the impact of flooding on young people. Again, during Storm Babette, we saw particularly the secondary school age children, so that's from 12 to 18. Many of those had massive classroom disruption during the pandemic. The older kids were about to sit exams, and then they were taken away from their peer network because of the impact of flooding. No support. There was one individual that we heard of who was having to travel, get a taxi from her new location just to attend school. She was barely in school for more than perhaps 2 hours a day because of the length of time that was taken to travel because of the mass situation in terms of very few local authority housing available and having to be relocated to different areas. It's important to sign up for flood warnings, and I know Emma's going to feature on this as well. And I have to say, prepare for the worst. Prepare your grab bag. Make sure that your family know what's going to happen, particularly if you're going to get up in the middle of the night, because flooding happens at all times of the day and nothing is sacred. If you are impacted, you can either contact the Scottish Flood Forum or our sister charity, the National Flood Forum, which supports communities at risk of flooding. The SFF is supported by the Scottish Government, whereas the National Flood Forum is in a different position, but they work in many of the English local authority areas. But as I said earlier, there are issues in terms of the for those who aren't able or don't have insurance. So we provide information on how to clean out your property, how to dry it out, where to get support, and facilitating dialogue with loss adjusters and insurance queries. We can also provide information on schemes such as Flood Ray, which is an umbrella scheme designed to keep insurance premiums at an affordable level. But certainly in the last couple of years, what we are seeing is what is affordable. And that's something, again, that we all have to be aware of. Next slide, please, Andrew. So, how floodwater enters into a property. It can get in many ways. It's important to identify all the entry points. And if you think back to my first slide with Lorraine's property, the water there appears to have entered into the property at the service point, which you can see in the top right of your screen there. One of the free services that the SFF offers clients and householders is what we call a property flood risk assessment, where we come out and visit a client's property and carry out a visual inspection, identifying the entry points which would give water access to a home. We then make recommendations on what products would be fitting for that particular property. Simple thing like an air vent. It's amazing how much water can get in there. But if you look at the construction of modern homes, then one property that I visited had 16 air vents. Now, if you consider that a standard air vent cover costs between £50 to £100, that's a lot of cash. And currently the situation in Scotland is that not many local authorities offer discounted schemes to help provide the householder to buy these items. Many homes are also built on areas which are now described as potentially vulnerable areas. In Scotland, the position is that homeowners have the responsibility to protect their properties. We're all living through that cost of living crisis, and there are some measures which may seem low cost or a little bit quirky, like the wellies on the bottom of the table legs in the bottom picture there, but they are effective. So for more handy hints, you can also check out one of our colleagues a lady affectionately known as Flood Mary, who has been flooded herself many times. And if you Google Flood Mary or check out floodmary.com, she has lots of low-cost initiatives on her site, which can be of assistance. Next slide, please, Andrew. So, community resilience. There are various products on the market, from flood barriers and doors, air brick covers, sump pumps, but knowing what is right for you and your property can be confusing. So apart from our website, we also hold exhibitions to demystify what these products are all about. And thanks to Flood Ray, who I mentioned earlier in terms of insurance, we took delivery of our very own flood bus, which we are taking out to communities that have been impacted by flooding to raise awareness of what the different protection measures are. The old traditional sandbags that everybody tends to phone up and ask for as soon as weather warnings go out, they're not that effective. And if it's your gran that is having to think about protecting their property, then they're very heavy and very unwieldy. So there are other aspects to household resilience that can be looked at. There's also community alerting, and we are supporting a number of communities across Scotland with a system called RiverTrack, which you'll see in the bottom left slide there. Basically, this is a system which is set with various trigger points. So when the water reaches a particular level, it will send messages to display units in local homes, and it will allow them to take action. This goes hand in hand with a community flood action group, and is a really good way of giving power back to a community in helping them move on from a previous flood event. Other models and other alerting systems are available, but one of our groups that we've been working with, ALIS, and you saw some pictures at the very start there, they have actually taken it one step further, and they have their own retained ALIS flood team, which is a first in Scotland. So just like you would have a retained fire service, you've got a retained number of volunteers who will deploy in a time of flood. There are all sorts of measures there, and I'm sure Emma is far better at explaining some of these, particularly maybe the natural flood management, because everybody is conscious that there must be different ways, whether it be a leaky barrier or some damming or laying down fallen timber to slow the flow. But I think we all need to consider these as part of a suite of resources. And these resources, the best one is the actual individuals, the people who know their community. So in talking to individuals, it's important to seek that local knowledge, work with the community, because only by working together can we help mitigate the damage to our homes and communities. Key to collaboration is listening and talking to each other. It's not always easy to achieve. And unless you've experienced flooding yourself, how can you build empathy? It's easy to make assumptions, and that is true of both sides. And we need to remember this in our engagement with the public. Scotland has its own standards of engagement, but it's very difficult when you're perhaps a flood team of one and covering a wide geographical area. So what we do need to do is work on an understanding of the roles and responsibilities that organisations have, because it might not be their remit to fix that particular problem. But having those conversations is really important. And one of the valued aspects of what we at the Scottish Flood Forum do is to support community, share good practice, and to be on hand to facilitate, not mediate, but facilitate those conversations. We live in a society these days where sometimes we're not sure who our neighbours are, particularly in remoter areas. So getting people to and round the table and working with each other is certainly one way forward. And building a more trusting and collaborative approach will see us through whatever climate change may throw at us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Carol. And just I'll obviously show this last slide just to encourage people to obviously go to Scottish Flood Forum's website. There's lots of resources there. Obviously, Carol has referred to during the course of her presentation, but you can obviously access that and you can have a look through at your leisure. I would encourage people then, if you have some questions as well, feel free at this point to pop them within the chat, and obviously we will then come to them later after Emma's presentation, when we'll have a good 30 minutes or so for questions and answers. So Emma, I will stop sharing. So if you're able to then take control and start to share your slides. Thank you.
I'll come off mute first just to make sure this actually works.
Yes, so that seems to be, that's working now, Emma, so please go ahead.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks again to Andrew and Duncan for inviting Carol and I along today to talk to everybody. It's great to see so many people on the call. So just quickly about me, I will know some of you on the call. I'm sure we've met at various conferences and things, and it's always great to make connections and learn about people and their own involvement in community resilience building. But for those of you who have never seen me before, a little bit about me. I've worked for the UK government in one guise or another for about 30 years, 18 plus now years with the Environment Agency, covering a range of topics. Yes, all of those pictures are of me in various interactions with my environment over the various years. The bottom one actually is a nod to you, Carol. I don't know, you might recognise it. It's a bit small, but that's Cobbler behind me there. Got to get a picture of Munro in. Actually, I didn't climb Cobbler that day. I climbed Ben Eam, which is a little bit behind it, but that was taken in September last year. I'm very fond of Scotland. I spend a lot of time there. About the Environment Agency, and I'm very conscious, and I'm also very guilty at times of making assumptions about what I know about my own organisation and what other people know about my organisation and what its remit and role and responsibilities are. So just to add a little bit more detail to what you may already know about the Environment Agency, we're an executive non-departmental public body, so essentially a quango, and we have 3 different roles really. We advise government, we are also an operator, and we're a regulator in terms of environmental protection. We improve the quality of our water and land and air by tackling pollution. We work with businesses to help them comply with environmental regulations because a healthy and diverse environment is better for everyone and contributes to economic growth. We're a Category 1 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act of 2004, and we have a duty under that Act to work with partners to plan for and to respond to incidents. In terms of flooding, we're responsible for managing the risk of flooding from rivers and the sea and reservoirs. Lead local flood authorities in England are responsible for managing the risk of flooding from surface water and groundwater and from ordinary watercourses, and they lead on community recovery. And district councils also play a key part in managing and responding to flooding. We also have a role in managing environmental risks. It's not just flooding. We respond to thousands of incidents every year, around 25,000 incidents, of which around 500 are designated as significant or major incidents each year. These include flooding, pollution, waste, air quality, fisheries, water resources, and other types of environmental incidents. We manage hundreds of incidents every day. The majority of incidents are reported to the Incident Communication Service by members of the public and are dealt with by our area teams across 14 geographical areas in England. Flooding is obviously the most obvious and perhaps the most famous type of incident we deal with, but we deal with far more than just flooding. Flooding is the most common natural hazard in Europe, probably globally, and it accounts for the largest number of casualties, Carol's already alluded to, and the highest amount of economic damages. And we've seen horrendous examples over recent months and years right across Europe and beyond. Flooding, though, is a natural process. And it's entirely normal for rivers to flood. We can never build our way out of flood risk, but climate change is increasing the likelihood and the potential impacts of flooding. So people and properties and communities that are prepared will respond better and recover more quickly from flooding. That's why helping communities to improve their flood resilience is so important. It helps reduce the economic and human impacts of flooding, and Carol's spoken very movingly about those human impacts. As Carol said, we can't, you can replace furniture but not memories. So if we can help build personal resilience as well as property and community resilience, then that's better for everyone. The impacts caused by flooding affect people, property, infrastructure, and they cause disruption to everyday lives, and sometimes for a long time after flooding has happened. The Environment Agency's role in building resilience has both government and internal corporate drivers. The UK government's resilience framework was published in 2022 and set out a vision for improving preparedness. The National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy was published by the Environment Agency in 2020 and was followed by a roadmap of actions in 2022. The strategy, which we developed with partners, has 3 long-term ambitions. One is working with partners to bolster resilience to flooding and coastal change. One is making the right investment and planning decisions to secure sustainable growth and environmental improvements. And the third is about ensuring that people understand the risks posed by flooding and coastal change and know what they can do to protect themselves and their belongings. Carol's also alluded to this about the resilience being quite an overused term, and what do we mean by this? Well, this is what the Environment Agency means by resilience, and this is published in our the National Flood Risk Strategy, and it's about the ability of people and places to plan for, protect, respond to, and recover from flooding and coastal change. And there are a number of ways in which we do this. We're a statutory consultee on spatial planning applications where flood risk may be a consideration, and we inform the development and implementation of spatial planning policy nationally. We obviously protect people from flooding by building flood defences along with other risk management partners. And we use property flood resilience techniques, but these can't stop all flooding. When flooding happens, it will affect people and communities first. Emergency responders and risk management authorities can help to respond, but the communities will be first on scene and the last to leave. So it's in an individual person and a community's own interest to help themselves as much as possible before other responders and support arrives. The more that people can help prepare themselves, the quicker they will be able to recover and the less damage they will experience. The Environment Agency is funded to help reduce flood risk and build flood resilience in a number of different ways. We have a large investment programme. The current investment programme is a 2-year investment of £2.6 $1.5 billion to build and repair over 1,000 flood and coastal erosion risk management schemes and defences between April 2024 and March 2026, and this will better protect 52,000 homes and businesses. Between 2021 and 2027, the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Fund, managed by the Environment Agency, will allocate 150 million to the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme, FCRIP, where 25 local areas will demonstrate how practical innovative actions can work to improve resilience to flooding and coastal erosion, and up to £36 million to the Coastal Transition Accelerator Programme to support communities and businesses to adapt to a changing coast. 8 million is going to the Adaptive Pathways Programme for work on long-term planning for climate adaptation in the Thames and in the Humber estuaries, and also in the Severn Valley and in Yorkshire. And in addition, our area-based flood resilience engagement advisors and other area colleagues work with communities at flood risk to raise awareness of the risk they face, to encourage sign up to flood warnings, to support development of community flood plans, and provide community resilience advice, the kind of which that Carol has already spoken about. So what can, if you are living in a community in England, that's at risk of flooding, what can the Environment Agency offer to you? Well, we do provide national, hopefully you're aware of this if you are in that position, we provide national information on long-term flood and coastal erosion risk through our flood map and erosion maps, which are on gov.uk. We also provide information on gov.uk about what people can do to prepare themselves and their properties for flooding, such as signing up for flood warnings or installing those property flood resilience measures that Carol's already talked about. Our flood resilience engagement officers can support community-led planning and testing of local flood plans. We can also support the establishment of flood groups or flood warden schemes and provide information, advice and training. We issue flood warnings and alerts and forecasts when flooding is expected to help people take action or know when to take action. We provide information to people in areas at risk through our Check for Flooding service, also on gov.uk, and we have a floodline telephone service. And we may also share information and advice through flood wardens and flood groups that we are in contact with. After a flood, our flood resilience engagement advisors and colleagues host or attend meetings and drop-ins to support flooded communities. We help to gather information about flood impacts so that we can learn lessons for future, and we help to signpost people to support services and information. So how does the public respond? The slight issue that we have is that despite everything that we do, and Carol's talked about as well, all these support mechanisms that we collectively offer, all the support that we can offer to reduce the likelihood and the impacts of flooding and to support community-led resilience building, we're still not where we want to be. Research tells us there are various reasons why people don't necessarily act even when they have information available to them about the risk that they face. They could be in denial. Nobody likes to think about bad news and the bad things that might happen to them. There's evidence to suggest optimism bias, which means that you think it will happen to somebody else but not to you. Sometimes it is just a lack of awareness. People don't all have access to information or can't interpret it in the right way. Some of it, as Carol has alluded to, in terms of affordability or what your other priorities might be. If you've got a choice between food and insurance or property flood resilience, then you are going to have to make a difficult decision. But the people who suffer from the lack of preparedness are the people who are going to be worst affected by it. Anecdotal evidence suggests it takes a householder an average of 3 floods before they take action to protect their property. What we'd like to see is people having a much greater understanding of the risks that they face and knowledge about what they can do to help themselves. But it's not just about the knowledge, it's about feeling able and confident to take those steps. And they might be small steps. It might just be putting an air brick in or moving that box of keepsakes to a higher shelf. We would like to see people acting on warnings and the advice when flooding happens. And we would love to see more people getting involved and helping themselves and others in their community to prepare. So helping neighbours in with personal and community flood plans, setting up or joining flood groups, volunteering with charities to help others, and supporting vulnerable people in their neighbourhoods. So I'm now going to sort of turn this back on you. I'm sure you've got some questions for Carol and I, but here are some questions for you, which is that what do you think we, as in the Environment Agency and maybe other government or local authority organisations, could do to help communities to take more action to help themselves? If people have got examples of advice or information that you found really useful that actually prompted you to take action or that has helped in your community, then please, I'd love to see those examples. And what are the things that you think prevent communities from taking action, and how might we address those? So I'll just leave those there. I'll just put those seeds in your mind. I have one other slide, and I'm hoping that Andrew or Duncan can transfer these links into the chat. All of the things that I've talked about over the last few minutes in terms of checking your long-term flood risk, checking your immediate flood risk, preparing for flooding, signing up for flood warnings, all of these links are here. And there's a lovely the bottom one there, Missy's Tale. If people haven't seen that, I'd really recommend watching Missy's Tale about preparing for flooding. But I will pause there. Thanks, Andrew.
Well, that's fantastic, Emma. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, and also Carol, thank you very much. So this is very much the point where our webinars become more interactive, and we have opportunities both in terms of the chat, and please, Emma, Carol, if you see any questions, comments in the chat, to also feel free to address those via that. But this is an opportunity for people to also raise their hands and come off camera on mute and yeah, pose a question for either Carol, Emma, or both. We obviously have a number of people that have already placed some questions in the chat, so I'm obviously very willing to verbalize those, but if you'd really like to verbalize them yourselves or maybe expand upon and further contextualize them, please raise your hand, and I can unmute and bring you off camera. But maybe just to get things started, as people begin to raise hands, there's a couple of questions in the chat that I could maybe personally direct Carol, that hopefully you'll be able to kind of address relatively quickly as people raise their hands. So one is in relation to, and this is from Glenn Ferry, that you might have seen, Carol, in relation to the free flood assessment. And the question is, how does this work, and whether this is a kind of homeowner request or whether there's a different type of kind of proactive approach taken external to the homeowner to, you know, after, you know, based on some kind of flood risk assessment, for example, to enable those free flood assessments to occur.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for your question, Glenn. So there's kind of three approaches that we operate to this. So as part of our support in the immediate aftermath of a flood, when we're maybe in a particular location, when we're meeting members of the public, we offer those assessments. And because in Scotland, it is, as I said earlier, very much about the householder's responsibility for protecting their property. And I think that property resilience is still a little bit of a dark art for some people. So it's kind of doing the kind of straightforward assessment. The situation that we find ourselves north of the border is that currently there's a number of engineering specialists who might do a survey for a local authority, but in terms of the actual domestic market, there's certainly scope for more of us to be involved in that aspect, but we consider it as part of improving the individual homeowners' preparedness. And it's very much like, you know, you've got to address your own household resilience before you can maybe think about volunteering for the community if circumstances and funds allow it. So what it involves is a member of our team would go out to the home and actually go around. We use an app now to generate the reports, and we make recommendations because it is very much up to the individual householder whether they can afford to or implement some of those recommendations. So people will start with things like flood barriers, perhaps. Flood doors can be more expensive, particularly if you're in a traditional style property, and because it needs to fit it. And obviously, if you're in a listed area, that has other issues as well. But there are some things like air vent covers, automatic ones, so that if you're away on holiday, they'll automatically close. There are a number of common things which people would probably implement first rather than doing a whole blanket piece. It's still very much a baby industry, generally speaking, in terms of maybe finding a trusted tradesman as well to actually fix these things to your property. So by no means are we at a place yet where those measures are possibly infallible, but at least the homeowner knows what they have to do to try and keep water out of their property. But equally, as we saw in Brechin in 2023, where the flood defence is overtopped there, even with the best will in the world, it didn't keep the water out of the houses because there was so much of that water. But what I think we need to do and approach this now because of climate change is looking at it from a perspective of it will buy you more time to get yourself and your families out of harm's way. So, you know, the way that we're approaching these things, I think, is changing all the time. I hope that answers your question.
Well, thank you, Carol. And Glenn, actually, I just see Glenn, you have raised your hand. So I will perhaps come to you, Glenn, first before some of the other questioners, because obviously I'm assuming you're going to make a point related to the comment that you had in the chat. So Glenn, you should be able to come off mute at this point. So if you could maybe indicate.
Yes, thank you, Andrew and Carl. We're west of the border in Northern Ireland, so we're quite okay. Carl, thank you very much for that. You'd mentioned that the three approaches are that very much the immediate aftermath. In Northern Ireland, we have like a homeowner flood protection scheme, but it's very much government fund 10% of it, but that's still up to £1,000 for someone to find. So I think that free assessment on those low budget, low hanging fruit approaches is something I think we can certainly learn from here. We're developing community resilience around people. Well, they have the responsibility as a bit of a dark art, and I think that trusted tradesman and having someone to go to for that sensible, trusted response would be really helpful. So that's been really informative. And Flood Mary, I've been on the website there, brilliant.
Yeah, just to also mention, Glenn, that there is a UK-wide review of PFR being looked at the moment, which is trying to cover all bases in terms of thinking about flood resilience, from the products that are available to the lack of surveys, the lack of installers, all the cost, etc. And I know that the Environment Agency have been heavily involved in that. So if you want to drop your details, your email in the chat, I can give you some of the contacts for that, because I'm sure they'd be glad to hear about your experiences in Ireland, so that they get as full a picture as possible. The report has been commissioned by the Environment Agency in Westminster. So it's, I see Emma nodding there. So yeah, I think it's important to get a representative sample of the situation on the ground at the present. Thanks.
Thank you, Carol. So just to stay with you, Carol, just because picking up on some of the early comments in the chat from just after and during your presentation, and before I come to John, who's raised his hand. So Tracy has just a quick question around the river tracking. I noticed it was one of the slides at the bottom left-hand corner, the river tracking to notify communities. And the question is really, how does that fit with, complement a flood warning service? So I wonder if you just have a quick maybe response to that chat, and then I'll come to John.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Tracy. So how it works is it's very much a community-based approach. And what we look for, because we have funding from the Scottish Government to help roll those community alerting systems out to areas that have experienced flooding. They vary in cost, but the RiverTrack one came out of a CivTech challenge a number of years ago, and the communities that we work with seem to respond to it quite well. But as I say, there are others available. It's a requirement from our side of things that when we're dealing, we need to have a community flood action group behind that, because it's all right having the technology in a number of key locations, but you do need the people then to take action. So it kicks things off by ensuring that the way the triggers are set, it gives people the amount of time to respond, to move the cars to higher ground, to go knocking on doors, to make sure that the little lady down the road is able to put her flood barrier up. So it's very much about a community focus and a community response to flooding. The flood warnings are there as well, but certainly, you know, as we saw during some other flood events, if an area's got massive cover by a red warning, for example, it can in some respects dull down the senses a little bit, because as Emma said in her presentation, you think, well, it's all right, it'll maybe happen up the road and it's not necessarily going to happen here. And equally, as we saw during Storm Babette, that a number of people who were saying to their insurance companies, well, we got hit by the flood water on the 8th of October, and the insurance company went, but you're not in an area that was covered by the red warning. Weather doesn't stop for a particular location. So it is about that community response. It is about engaging with the community. And I think that also helps answer one of the other questions I saw in the chat about it all feeds into that preparedness, almost the drilling, the exercises, the community roundtable events where you actually look at the preparation, you look at your emergency plan, not just your household plan, but your community emergency plan, and it all feeds into that. Hope that answers your question.
Well, thank you, Carol. I think at this point I'll take then 2 questions from the people who have their hands raised. So first of all, John Bonus, is that correct? And then after John, after your question, then Mick Devine. So Mick, after John has asked, then you're free to come in then. So go ahead, John.
Thanks very much. So yeah, I managed the town centre in Hastings, which in 2023 was underwater quite deeply 2 times. And I could, like Carol and Emma, talk about this forever as a result of that, and learning an awful lot about this subject. But what I want to focus on is asset registers. And actually, I think I was going to talk about public asset registers, flood risk asset registers. But actually, Carol, when you were talking about people's home preparedness, I think there's an issue around people's own personal flood protection asset products they've got around the house. So dealing with that one first, floods only come along every so often. And if you've got automated devices, things which are mechanical, which are designed to prevent your home from flooding, they need to be serviced regularly, but much like a boiler needs servicing annually, but a lot of people don't. And we discovered that we had a significant number of homes that had non-return valves added to their sewer systems by the water company many years ago. When flooding was prevalent, it hadn't been for ages. They'd actually been taken off the flood risk registers of the water companies without being told. And a lot of them weren't even aware that they had these devices in their sewers, in their basements, which were designed to prevent flood water from coming back up through the sewers. And as a result, many of them flooded because something had got stuck in the, literally just a bit of junk had got stuck in the flap and stopped the flap from closing properly. And that was enough for those properties to flood. So on a very small local personal level, it's important that people understand what mechanics they've got in their property or around their property that are designed to prevent flooding, and make sure that they are working when they're needed, because it's too late after it's happened. You can't put out the fire, you can't turn back the flood. But at a larger level, there's a legislative requirement for every strategic flood authority to have a flood risk asset register. And I think it was the PIM report that introduced that in 2011. Now, looking around the country, what I'm seeing is there's as many different, if you like, flavours of flood risk asset register as there are authorities putting them together. So there's no one standard, and virtually every single one I've looked at has got confusion around ownership of assets. It's got a lack of detail about asset condition. It's got nothing about asset maintenance programs and schedules. And yet what we found was that there were 2 or 3 things which should have been, very high red risk, flood risk asset register status, which had fallen between the cracks because the county council thought the water company was responsible, the water company thought the borough council was responsible. Some people thought it was riparian rights and it was down to private ownership. So yeah, I mean, okay, so have I got a question? This because this is all statements. I suppose my question is, maybe one for Emma, with a sort of national perspective. Have you seen a best of breed flood risk asset register that is being operated by a flood risk authority somewhere in the country that would be a good model to hold up? And if you haven't, maybe it's time that there's a proper review that they've done of these registers to say, we need to work out what they should look like and how they're used properly.
Well, thank you very much, John. So Emma, you'll have a little bit of time, because
I can do quite a quick one, actually, because there's a really short answer, John. Thanks very much for your question, and I agree with a lot of your observations, actually. I think that the short answer is no. I do not have an example of a gold standard, so I can be quick. It was my understanding, it was the pitch review that had that recommendation, you're right, and it was my understanding, but I would need to check, this isn't my area of expertise, but there was guidance issued to LLFAs, lead local flood authorities, about what should be in a risk register and how it should look, but how detailed or prescriptive that was and how much is enforced, I'm not sure. It's certainly something I'd be happy to take back to colleagues, but I'm not aware of. I don't personally, because it's not my area of expertise, have a gold standard. I think it's a great idea. And if the guidance isn't good enough, then maybe that needs looking at. I'd be very happy to take that back to colleagues. It's not something will be able to address myself, but I'll happily take that back. If you want to give me your contact details, I'll happily follow up with you.
Well, if I can just chip in there, Andrew, before we move on to Mick. What I would say, John, is that flood performance certificates for households are being looked at seriously. So when someone, say, sells their property in the future, then if they have flood protection measures that have been put in, then that will help. So in the home report, for example, or as part of the conveyancing. So it's maybe not here yet, but there is a time coming when those individual householders who didn't know about their NRVs might actually be better informed when they acquire a property as well.
So just one tiny little follow-up on that, which is very important actually, is that on the conveyancing for the homes I was talking about, several people have bought those homes fairly recently, over the last 3 or 4 years. One of the conveyancing questions in the the searches is a question that goes to the water company to say, has this property had any history of internal flooding? And the answer came back no, even though those water companies had installed non-return valves in those properties years ago. Essentially, a number of years had passed, and they said, "Oh well, the problem's gone away now." So they gave an answer of no, there is no history of flooding in this property.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for your contributions, and thanks to Emma and Carol for coming back quickly. And just before I go to Mick, and apologies, Mick, I wonder, Eleanor Stack, I wonder, I see your question in the chat, but if you're willing to come off mute and on camera or just off mute, then please just raise your hand. Otherwise, I can obviously verbalize the question. But Mick, you please go ahead first.
Oh, thanks very much, Andrew. I'm a member of a flood group in West Yorkshire. The Environment Agency very kindly came along today to meet with our group to talk about the adaptations pathways that were mentioned earlier. They're hoping to use the group and the town as a pilot. It's really promising, and it's great to be included in that. I suppose Carl had raised the point earlier about community engagement, drilling, testing plans, that sort of thing. But this adaptation pathways approach appears to be very long-term thinking, and our town hasn't really seen significant flooding for about 10 years. Interest is starting to wane. I'm just wondering how we keep people engaged during these quieter times, and how we keep people encouraged to think about community resilience.
I wonder, just before coming to Carol and not Emma, I saw your head nodding vigorously, so I don't know if you wanted to come in first, and then we can go to Carol.
I'm happy to come in, and thanks, Mick, for the question. I think the reason I was nodding actually is not necessarily because I have the magic bullet answer, but I think it's a question that keeps coming up, isn't it, about how to maintain momentum, particularly during peacetime when you haven't had either way, you've never had flooding. It's very hard to get people engaged in a place where flooding has not happened in living memory, or when, like you say, there are big gaps between floods, and people almost the fear of it goes away, and so people don't act anymore. I think so. It is a bit of a perennial problem. I suppose one thing that has occurred to me, and I've had conversations with others about, is around what else, because flood, we talk about, my focus is flooding. Obviously, we always talk about flood groups, but flood groups probably do other things as well. If you're going to respond to one type of volunteer, then there's a high likelihood that you're going to be active in your community in other ways. So I wonder if that is potentially a mechanism to help galvanize and maintain momentum in communities if the cause of your grouping, if you like, has faded, but are there other ways, other reasons for you to stay connected, and to other types of emergency that you could maybe think about, or something that other ways that you could think about supporting the community? Because I think you're right. I think it's a perennial question. If somebody has got the magic bullet answer to that question, then please put it in the chat, and you'll probably be very rich very quickly. But I think it is something that does come up, and I think anywhere where we have examples of how people have managed to maintain momentum over long periods of time, particularly when there hasn't been a lot of activity, I think those are they're really important to share those examples. So please do share if you do have them. I hope that helps a bit.
Well, thank you, Emma, and obviously just segueing into then Carol comments, but obviously you mentioned, Carol, during your presentation in terms of the compound events, and COVID obviously being very significant, but with the flooding ongoing. So yeah, that the emergence of groups and how they might morph over time, depending on what's going on within their community, and how that might enable the sustainment of their preparedness. But Carol, if you'd maybe like to comment on what Mick has talked about.
Yeah, sure. And I have to say that I think Emma's kind of bang on the money. in terms of the kind of wider resilience bit. In fact, a lot of the groups that we work with, and we have about 192 now, I think it is, individual groups that kind of sit under us or work with us. And they tend to call themselves resilient rather than flood action groups, because flood, they find, kind of limits them in what they can do. Think for it's always difficult to get new members as well, because it tends to be you know, those that have been flooded, and when it's out of living memory, I think one of the ways of kind of using climate change to maybe encourage younger members is thinking about the roles that you've got within your group as well. So for example, social media, maintaining your Facebook page, your WhatsApp group, all those kinds of things. They're also very inclusive of different generational groups as well, and equally people that might not be able to go out and do the heavy lifting side of things as well. Tabletop exercises, I think, is useful, and you know, work with your local fire and rescue service. They're usually really helpful about doing things. By the nods, you've maybe already tried all these things as well. So thinking of it in terms of the wider resilience piece, working with other groups, whether it's a local food bank or you know, depending on what else is going along as well. Might even be the local young farmers, because they've got tractors that can go and put, you know, if you're in a rural location as well. That's so it's tapping into those groups that are already out there to kind of give it a different dimension. Hope that helps.
Oh, thank you, Carol.
Yeah, cheers.
And you mentioned in terms of roles, and that really reminds me of our last webinar around how to retain volunteers, and you know, part of that discussion was around, you know, the different roles and how that might be, you know, one way of then looking at you know, attracting new volunteers around the kind of skills development that can happen within the context of the local organizations, and how that might be attractive then for different people, you know, wanting to build up skills in different ways. And yeah, just thinking on those kind of the role hats that people might have. So that's a really great another additional way to look at it. So Eleanor, you should be able to come off mute, but obviously you had a question in the chat also in terms of communications and risk perception. So please go ahead.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think it very much links to what Mick's just been saying about that community engagement. But risk perception comms, I mean, it's you know, huge amount of research and literature out there. But I was just wondering, from Carol and Emma's experience and the work that they've been doing, whether there've been any particular lessons that they've identified about how you navigate that balance of risk perception comms, particularly obviously in relation to flooding, but of course it goes across other risks in the UK. So whether it's the timing mechanisms, language, what are the key bits of learning over last 5-10 years, whether it's from Brecon to Lincolnshire, anywhere in between?
I wonder, Emma, do you want to go first?
Yeah, hi Eleanor, lovely to see you. Thanks for the question. I think I'm trying to think, I'm racking my brains because I feel like I do know something about this, but I'm now struggling to tap into it. I think there's lots of things in terms of I know about some evidence that we've done. This is one of these things that I'll go away after this call and I'll spot something that is relevant to this, but I don't have it at my fingertips now. But I think there is evidence. We do have research on why people do or don't act. We also do things like a lot of work. Our digital teams, and I'm sure Carol's the same when the Scottish Government are the same in terms of lots of digital user research and things like that about how to convey information. Flood risk information is very complex data. It's not always easy for professionals to understand it, let alone lay members of the public. And of course, we don't have the same level of and quality of data about different sources of flooding as well. So it can be quite difficult to navigate complex information. And risk perception is a very personal thing. And I think we know that in communities where you know, there are some people in communities which have flooded repeatedly who would actually describe themselves as quite resilient because they have flooded repeatedly and they kind of know what to do, whereas somebody who's never flooded before maybe isn't particularly resilient. I suppose that the bottom line for me is what do I want somebody to do? I want somebody to act rather than not act. So if you do a little bit because you think, it'll be fine, and you just do a little bit, at least you're doing something. If you're doing lots because you're more worried about what might happen and you do lots and lots more preparedness action, then great, because that is fab. But I guess it's, you know, for me it's about that person enabling people to, or supporting people to make their own decisions about what, so we can provide risk information or data about, you know, the likelihood of flooding in your area, but how you then interpret that in terms of what your own personal life and what is at risk in terms of your home or your belongings, your car, whatever, what you choose to do about that, but supporting people making their own decisions about that, because we can't tell everybody what to do. So I want people to be able to make their own decisions, but I want them to be able to make informed choices. I would rather people acted than didn't act, but how much you act is really, I don't know, come down to you. I don't know if that's a particularly helpful answer, and I don't mean to abdicate responsibility for it, but I think it's you know, I think we are human. People don't all have the same perception of risk for all sorts of different reasons. So I want people to be able to be people, but I want them to be able to do so in an informed way. So I don't know if that's helpful at all.
I wonder, Carol, if you maybe wanted to contribute, and then obviously Eleanor, you can come back then. Please go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, sure. I suppose, Eleanor, for me, one of the learnings is very much about when to have those conversations, because yes, in a situation, it's all too easy, I suppose, to jump from, yes, you've been flooded, so yes, you must do this, and here are the options. But people are not always in the right headspace to absorb the information and to act on it. Classic example from Raeburn was a lady who was insured. The guys came up to talk about, you know, the improvements, because her insurance had a build back better aspect into it. So that basically means that the insurance company will help you take action to make your home more resilient for flooding in the future. And, you know, the guys in conversations said to us, she wasn't ready for those conversations about your new resilient kitchen could look like this. It might be stainless steel, but because she was thinking, I've lost a spade of all things that her mother had given her, and she couldn't find it. You know, they found it in a skip that somebody else had chucked out as well. And I think it is like a bereavement. It is, you've got to take it and pace it in a way, maybe in bite-sized chunks. And one of the things that we do is that we don't say, here's a pack of leaflets that's going to tell you what to do and everything else. It is kind of more drip feed, because at different stages they'll be more receptive to those conversations. And again, if you can get a neighbour or whatever, so that they've got that trusted friend, that trusted source of information that they can refer back to. Because I've been at a number of community meetings now where it's, you know, everybody's sitting in a line at the front of the hall, taking a deluge of abuse, dare I say it, from other people, because they're not ready and they still haven't worked through those emotions. So there is definitely a place for giving information, but also in the right tone of it as well, and just being aware that these things take time and people are responding to things. PTSD is very common now because of flooding, but you know, that can be 5, 10, 15 years down the line, and it's all going to come back. So you're never sure what you're going to face for. So good engagement and consistent engagement, I think, is definitely key to getting people on the right starting point for that journey towards more resilience.
Thank you, Carol. Eleanor, if you wanted to come back, you can, but I see that a thumbs up as well. So yeah, I want to thank everyone who I see have been contributing in the chat as well. Obviously, people responding to other folks' comments and questions. So thank you all for contributing in that way. There are various obviously links and various other things provided within the chat as well. That would be fantastic. I see obviously some comments then in relation to some of the questions. So, you know, Anne Hardy, you know, mentioned some recent work that also draws upon relationships and connection to place, which will then very much tie into some of the things that both Carol and Emma have talked about in terms of memories and in terms of, you know, even, you know, risk perceptions and, you know, that kind of traumatic experience, you know, post an event based on you know, people's sense of place and attachment and their sense of home, etc. So thank you all very much for contributing in that way. We only have kind of five or so minutes left. If there is a really, you know, burning question that someone hasn't yet asked, then please raise your hand at this point. One of the other links that have been placed into the chat, and recognizing the fact that you know, a lot of the attendees at our webinars are dialing in from outside of the UK context, is a link that Duncan has placed a bit further up the chat to the International Consortium for Societal Resilience. So I mentioned our next webinar on the 25th of June will be colleagues from New Zealand, and those colleagues are very much you know, part of the International Consortium for Societal Resilience, and you can see then that web address within the chat that Duncan has placed in. So if you haven't come across it before and you're outside of the UK, please do check it out. Though Mick, just to reference your question in the chat, so the recording will be available hopefully later this week, and it will be via the NCSR webpage, where you can find the recordings of all of the previous webinars that we've had. So I think at this point, and it's coming up to tea time, so I think I want to thank all of you for attending and for contributing to this webinar, for asking your questions and contributing in other ways. I hope you've all found it informative, but I particularly want to thank Carol and thank Emma for generously giving of their time. There's obviously time today in the webinar, but obviously there's a lot of preparation that also goes into bringing together the presentations and the slides, etc. So I want to thank both of you then for contributing and for also making yourself available for those that might have follow-up comments. So thank you very much, and thanks to all of you, and I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible on the 25th of June for our next webinar. So as I said, this recording should be available towards the end of the week, so you can obviously then share that with your wider networks. So thank you very much, and I will see you later in June.